Well, welcome back, and thank you for joining us for the midweek Bible study as we go through just Jesus stories, walking our way through the Gospels. We've already been through Mark. Now we are about halfway through Matthew. Well, a third of the way through Matthew. We're in chapter 10. We're going to start at verse 32, right in the middle of a commission where Jesus is sending out his apostles to Judea, not to Samaria, not to the Gentiles. They got to pick the ripe fruit. The people who are ready, who are prepared, who they can rely upon to form the foundation, or really the base group for this new church, this new kingdom that Jesus is launching. And Jesus has not pulled any punches that this is going to be easy. In fact, he tells them it is not going to be easy, that some will receive, but others will beat them even in synagogues or congregations and drag them before leaders. He continues his warning and continues his promises in verse 32. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace for a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Now this seems to be rather a shock to us, because wasn't the birth announced by peace on earth, goodwill toward men? Yes, but that was a unilateral peace, not a multilateral. What I mean by that is heaven declared peace on and with the people of the world, but the world did not declare peace back. Therefore, Jesus is explaining, when I show up, it's not always going to be peaceful. Sometimes when I show up, there's going to be sharp divisions so that we know who is with us and who is not. Some will be peaceful back to God. Others will war against God, often while claiming they are warring on behalf of God. Jesus will explain to them that some people will think they are pleasing God by putting you to death. The world didn't declare peace back. We're not entering a peaceful place. But Christ came truly to bring peace on earth. But if the people on earth don't want peace with Christ, then it becomes a struggle. I think most of us can get that. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. I'm going to stop there. He is not talking here about everyday life. For example, you've just had a baby. Maybe it's your first baby. And you're looking at that baby and they own you. That you look at that baby and your heart has just popped. God's not up there going, well, they're not thinking about me now. They're supposed to love me better. That's not what he's saying. He is saying that if the coming of Christ splits the family, who are you going to choose? Are you going to desert Christ or just drop the whole Christ thing because of family? Or are you going to stay with Christ? This is a real problem for many people on the planet. Because if they continue to follow Christ, they can be stoned to death. They can be beheaded in many countries. Over 50 countries will have blasphemy laws that if you follow Jesus, it's considered blasphemy. Mobs can tear down your house. You can lose your job. Your family can disown you. Your family can kill you, and their killing of you is called an honor killing. To keep their honor, they'll kill you. So while in America, in our safe spaces, most of us never have to face that level, the fact is that level is all over the planet. And then even we here can face ostracism by the family, ridicule by the family. We can be kicked out of our family. We can lose our friends. Years and years ago, the Doobie Brothers sang, "Jesus is just all right with me." And it was a shocker because that's not the message that the 60s and 70s generally put out there. Are you willing to put it out there? This is who I am. This is who I follow. And he said, if you do that, you may have to choose between God and family. Which one will you choose? That's what he's talking about. These are extraordinary circumstances. They do happen. They happen to a lot of us in our lives. They happen to a lot of people all the time. Who will you choose? Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Once again, he is not sugarcoating this. Please remember that to us, the cross is a symbol of salvation, the love of God, the victory of Christ over death. To them, it was the most horrific symbol possible. It was a daily reminder of the power, the might of Rome, and their absolute lack of power and their absolute insignificance to the powers that ruled. Crosses took often days and days to die on. And they would put the crosses in very public places where people walking to the market, people in a neighborhood would walk by. It was meant to terrorize the group. And Jesus looks at them, and he's looking at people who have never seen a cross in a positive light, never seen it as a piece of jewelry. And he says, you want to follow me? Pick up your cross, because that's what it's going to cost you. You could end up there. I think this is one of the most bone-chilling places in all of Scripture. And certainly one of the most bone-chilling things Jesus ever said to people. And he loved these people, but he's being honest with these people. And this is also a pretty important point for us. Are you ill? Do you have a persistent illness? Something that you fought for a while. Maybe it gives you pain. Maybe it limits your ability to function in society or to go where you'd like to go. Do what you want to do. That is not a sign that God doesn't love you. What are people persecuting you? Are they hunting you in the streets because you're a Christian? If so, that's not a sign that God doesn't love you. The love of God does not protect us from the pain of life and even our death. The love of God promises that our soul does not die and that we will be with God forever in glory. That's the promise. And also the promise is that God will be with us through all of the pain and the trials. He doesn't leave the room. He stays with you. Do not make the mistake that Job's friends made in assuming that when things go really bad, you must have done something wrong. Sometimes, yes, a lot of my scars are self-inflicted, mental, physical. But most of the time, when something goes bad, it's not because God doesn't love you. He always loves you. And it's not because God's disciplining you. It's because we live in a world at war. Sometimes, like Job, when all hell breaks loose, it's because you're doing the right thing. Please remember, he says, whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. In other words, just saying, whoever chooses to save their life by dumping me will end up losing their life. But whoever grabs me will save their life, even if the earthly life ends. So it's all a matter of, do we trust him? Will we trust him? Will we go with this? Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. Anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who's my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. In other words, God is watching you. We used to sing a song, an old hymn that I hadn't heard very many places, but a couple places we lived would sing it. And there's an all-seeing eye watching you. And as a little boy, that was not a comforting thought, frankly. But Jesus here is saying it in a positive way. I want you to think about you. Those of you that are welcoming us into your life, whether it's via the podcast or via the video, and those of you that are even giving money here, Jesus sees this. Jesus knows it. He will not forget it. He said, now I'm not going to call myself a prophet here because that word means something different in English. At the time of Jesus, a prophet meant a public proclaimer of the message of God. So in that sense, I would be a prophet, but we don't use that term in English that way. So whoever welcomes a prophet welcomes the one who sent him, and they will receive the same reward the prophet receives. So if you can't travel the world and preach the gospel, you can support this, and you receive the same reward that we receive as we travel the world as best we can. You see the point? God's saying those who support, those who welcome, those who bless, and it doesn't even have to be money. It can just be a card saying, thank you guys for what you're doing. We're praying for you. You will receive the same reward we receive because you've encouraged us and you've welcomed us. Doing that welcome and kindness thing is really important to God. So much so that he said, even if all they give you is a cup of cold water, I'm never going to forget what they did. Isn't that amazing? Now, most of the time we do that in a negative way. I know what you did and I'm never going to forget it. That's not the way God works. He forgives sins and iniquities, but he remembers what you did. That was good. This is the end of that limited commission, that whole chapter. It's worth going back over and reading it again and just seeing the weight of it and seeing the reality of it. Jesus doesn't sugarcoat it. Doing good makes you an enemy of those who don't want you to do good or who call your good evil. But do it anyway. Take the hits, flee when you can, pick up your cross. The crown is waiting. And then we hit chapter 11. Really interesting moment. After Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in the towns of Galilee. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Whoa, let's talk about this. John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin. They'd known each other all of their lives. John the Baptist preached and was baptizing people in the Jordan, and all of Judea, we're told, all of Jerusalem came out to him. And whenever Jesus walked by, he pointed at Jesus and he said, "Behold the Lamb. This is the Messiah. I am not worthy to untie the shoelaces off of his feet." How did he get then to, "Are you the one we're waiting for, or should we wait for another?" There are two ways to read this. Probably more than two, but two ways commonly read. One is that John in prison was beginning to lose his faith, which, by the way, is not a criticism. It's an observation. We do tend to have faith struggles whenever our expectations fail and whenever we're facing great pain while outside it seems things are going just peachy, and yet nobody's springing us. Jesus can heal from the dead, or raise from the dead. He can heal sicknesses. He can walk on water. He can absolutely pop open a prison door. He's done it. He'll do it, rather, with Paul, with Silas, with Peter. Why aren't you doing it here? Why aren't you doing it now? Faith. Or the other, that John the Baptist is trying to spur Jesus into now. Go now. Show your power now. And yes, that probably would involve free me. Jesus was not insulted by either way you read this. He was not hurt. He wasn't us. We get very testy when things like this happen, not Jesus. Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." What a sweet and poignant thing there to put at the last. He's saying, let John know I am working. I am doing what I'm called to do. But to all of them, he says, blessed is the one who doesn't stumble because I don't do what they expect. Here's the thing. We all have the God we want. Are you willing to take the God who is? We all have a concept of Jesus that we'd like to see. But will you go at his pace, his direction, allowing him to call the shots, even if it means you're in prison and you're not getting out? Are you willing to not stumble because of Jesus' timing, his tactics, his strategy, the way he does things? It's tough. It is. I have, like many of the prophets in the Old Testament, cried out to God, what are you doing and why are you not doing? The trick is to be able to wrestle with God without losing contact with God and faith in God or faith in his goodness. And for some of you, that's a really easy thing to do. For others of us, that's a struggle. And I've made very public my struggle. I wrestle with God daily. And it's the only way that I can keep moving forward because I don't want to stumble because of him. I have to learn what he's doing and trust him. And that's not a one and done thing. That can take a while. As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What'd you go out to the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what'd you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No. Those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Oh, yes. And I'll tell you more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way before you. Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So what's going on here? Jesus makes it very plain to the crowd. John the Baptist is highly esteemed in heaven. Wait, he's in prison. Falsely. He's about to be killed, which I'm not sure he knew at that time. But with Herod, you figured it was going to happen. Herod was rather like Nero or Caligula. If you got close to him, you assumed you were going to be killed somehow or the other. You are highly esteemed even when the world doesn't, and all the evidence around you makes it look like nobody cares. Nobody loves. Think of Daniel. Young man, he is castrated and taken into captivity. He is forced to serve as an advisor and as an administrator in the empire that stole him from his family, killed many of his people, and has imprisoned him and brutalized him. A lot of people did not survive the castration. And they didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have anesthesia. They did all that to him. He has spent his life trapped in this place. And yet when an angel arrives and Daniel falls down, terrified, faints, the angel lifts him up and goes, "Don't be afraid, Daniel. You are highly esteemed in heaven." Wow. And Jesus turns back to the crowd and says, just so that we're clear here, John the Baptist is highly esteemed in heaven. What'd you go out to see? You go out to see a nice polished person? He's not polished. He's rough. He's gruff. But he is highly, in fact, there's never been anybody born, or the NIV says risen, greater than John the Baptist. But then he adds something which seems to be kind of a little crack of the whip there, a quick turn in direction. He says, but the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. What does he mean by that? Well, as he makes it very plain later, and as we've already seen in the book of Mark, the concept of greater and lesser in the kingdom of heaven is no big thing to Christ because we're in the kingdom. And he is actually saying he is massively important to us in heaven, but so are you. So is everybody. God's not going to spring the prison doors for everybody. God's not going to heal disease for everybody. He's not going to feed everybody, but they are highly esteemed. He adores them. He sees the crowd and has compassion, as we saw last week. He goes further. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence. Or there are other early manuscripts that says the kingdom of heaven has been forcefully advancing. Two completely different readings. We do not know which one was the original. Most versions just grab one and put the other one down in the notes. And violent people have been raiding it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. Whoever has ears, let them hear. He says, open up your mind, open up your ears. Get this, people. He goes, to what can I compare this generation? And this is really important. This is a revelation about don't let God and Jesus cause you to stumble because they're not like you expected. He says, what shall I compare this generation? They're like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to others, we played the pipe for you. You did not dance. We sang the dirge, and you did not mourn. God will not march to your tune. He will not enjoy something merely because you want him to, and he will not curse something just because you want him to. He is God, the great, irreducible God, immutable. We change for him, and we have to learn to trust him when we don't understand what he's doing or what he's not doing. John came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, he has a demon. Something wrong with that guy. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. That last phrase is another very, very common Semitic expression of the time. In other words, by their fruit you shall know them. He's saying, John didn't eat or drink, and they said he had a demon. I eat and drink, and they say, I'm a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of publicans and sinners. In other words, you are not going to please the people of the world. That's been the message, hasn't it, since we started chapter 10. You're not going to please the people of the world, and they're going to accuse you of all kinds of things. And they're going to tell you, all right, this month we celebrate this. On this, we do this. If you don't sign this declaration of belief in all of these social issues, you can't have a job. He's saying that's what they're going to do to you. Choose. Make your choice. They're going to criticize you one way or the other. So make the right choice. Life is not measured by the amount of awards you get, promotions you get, the numbers in a bank account. Life is measured by what you've left behind. Wisdom is proved right by her deeds. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns in which most of his miracles had been performed because they did not repent. I want to stop there. I've had people ask me, and I've wondered when I was younger, why doesn't God just continue to do the miracles that Jesus did through us all the time? Now, some of you come from churches where you're saying, wait, we do them. It's not the same. Somebody that's never been able to walk now walks perfectly. Somebody that's dead now is not dead. It's not the same at all. What you've seen on your stages, what you've seen in your revivals, it doesn't look like what Jesus did. But why did he do it and isn't doing that now? Does God do miracles now? Of course he does. But it's not the same as then. He moves in mysterious ways now. Well, why? He did it to show people who he was so that they would listen to the message. They saw the healings. They wanted the healing. They didn't want the healer. They weren't interested in the message. They just wanted comfort. I remember once a young man in his 20s came up after he heard me preach, and he said, I want to do what you do. And I said, what would that be? And because I do several things, he goes, I want to preach like that. And I said, well, that's great. Let's get you started on study and such. And within a few minutes, he was going, no, I want to be able to, I want to do that this week. No. That's like watching an operation and going, all right, I'm next. I got next, whatever's coming through. No. You want what I have, but you're not willing to pay a cost to get it. That's not how this works. We want Jesus. We want our souls healed and our lives healed, and we want to be saved. Well, you're going to have to take the package. His message is there too. He goes, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it'll be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the heavens? No, you will go down to the realm of the dead, to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. God doesn't do miracles for us so that we will believe. He did that to establish who he was in Christ. But now it's the message. He says, don't ignore the message. Don't ignore the message, because if you do, there's a consequence. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. The phrase little children there can mean little children, but generally speaking in a Semitic age, it meant those with no power, no standing, the little people. Us. We're never going to have a state dinner in our honor. They're never going to bring in the Philharmonic to perform in our honor. We're not going to get a parade. We're not the kings and queens of this world, whatever office they call themselves. We're not. And Jesus here is talking to his Father saying, thank you for not just giving this to the wise people and such, but rather hiding it from them and giving it to the people who don't have, who thought they weren't worth anything, who thought God didn't care about them. Please remember, in Jesus' day, there was no real thought of the individual. It was the community. There was nothing approximated the concept of human rights. Nothing. The death of an individual being tortured or beaten by the state, there's no harm in that. There is no foul. There is no justice to be asked for, because there was no debt to be paid. If the state killed a person, then okay, a Roman soldier kill you. There's no blowback on that. There's no international court. There's nothing. The life of the individual meant nothing. And Jesus comes and says, yes, it does. God sees you. I've come to you. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Read Hebrews chapter 1 a couple of times. Let it soak in, and then come back and read this verse again. It's kind of mind-blowing. Nobody knows the Father but the Son. Nobody knows the Son but the Father. And in chapter 1 of Hebrews, Jesus is the exact representation of the Father. He is just what the Father looks like, sounds like, acts like, what the Father's attitudes toward us are. And that is all super good news. We have been seen, loved, cared for, and saved. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I want to ask you, the churches where you've gone, maybe where you're going to now, can they say this legitimately? When I was a boy, every now and then a preacher would read these passages, and I would think, it doesn't feel light. It doesn't feel easy. All of the anger from the pulpit, all of the rules, all of the judgment, all of the forced conformity, it didn't feel like love, and it didn't feel easy, and it wasn't light. You couldn't move without getting busted. Something was wrong here. If your church isn't bringing good news, then there's a problem. Now, does that mean that we just, our way through the world? No. We've read chapter 10 and 11. We know about the pain. We know about the injustice that we're going to face. We know that sort of thing. And so our churches should talk about that. But if your churches spend their time forcing your conformity and making you feel guilty, it's time to find a different group. Because Christ brings an easy, light burden. It is a burden. It is a yoke. But it's easy and light. A lot easier and lighter than the one the world wants to put on you. And then we can start this discussion in chapter 12. Jesus went, and we're going to use this passage actually in one of our Sunday series on the strange and wonderful world of Scripture. So make sure that you're catching up with that 11-part series. It's ongoing now, so you can go back and check. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick up some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." All right, we're just going to start this and we're going to finish it next week. What's going on? The Pharisees had codified the Sabbath, surrounding it with laws to the point where you really couldn't do anything on the Sabbath. An Orthodox Jew to this day prepares all of their food for Saturday before sundown on Friday. No cooking is done. They don't turn on or off lights. They don't pick up their phone. They don't turn on the television because that would be work to do that. Now, that's not what the Sabbath was created for. It was created to be a time of rest and focus on God, a little healing time between work. God designed that for our benefit, but it had become a burden by this time. They would, a Sabbath day's journey was, and it differs, but about a third of a mile. And you could not go more than a third of a mile from your property or you were working. So some of the Pharisees would actually get old pottery and break it into pieces and put that in their robe, and every third of a mile throw a piece out, because that way they were never more than a third of a mile from their property. See, that kind of legalism is what we're talking about here. You were allowed, by the way, if some of you are going, well, those crops weren't theirs. Yeah, they are. Anybody who's hungry was allowed to glean from any food as you walked through the field. You pick up the wheat, you just do this with it, or rub it around, blow off the chaff, pop it in, and chew. It wasn't stealing from the farmer because that was part of Jewish culture. It was a whole gleaning thing. A lot of rules about it, all benefiting the hungry and the poor. And then the Pharisees made it to where as you're just walking through, grabbing it, popping it in your mouth, that's harvesting. You're working now. And Jesus is about to bring it to him in a way that shows you he meant what he said when he just talked about loving you and seeing the individual. But we're going to do that next week. God bless you. Thank you for supporting us and loving us so well. We love you back. And if we can love you better, send us an email, info@oursafeharbor.com, and tell us how, because we'd sure like to do it. God bless. Go in peace.